I was driving through eastern Washington on some state routes. There were no rest stops or cities, but I had done the route enough to know there were these massive dirt areas every 40 miles where you could park safely away from the road. I decided to call it a night and closed my blinds and laid down to watch something on my phone after truffling. And I hear someone try to open the driver's side door. I haven't heard any vehicles on the road the whole time I'm parked, but I get up to peek out the curtains. As I'm looking out into the blackness of the driver's side window, I hear them try the passenger side door. I peek down from the top of the curtain but can't see anything, so I start the truck and kick on the lights. I'm fairly freaked out at this point, so I'm still not opening the curtains but peeking through gaps. Nothing. Nobody is standing near either of my doors or parked within sight line. I take a deep breath and close the sleeper curtains too, because for some reason that's going to make things better, right? After laying back down and convincing myself that something blew against the truck, and it only sounded like the doors, it was fairly windy outside and a lot of flat ground, I hear what sounds like someone trying to pry upon the vents on the sleeper. The door handles start clicking again, and the truck starts shifting like someone is climbing on it. I hit the little alarm button in the sleeper hoping to spook them off, but it does nothing but add to the noise of door handles, fingers tapping on windows and chassis, and the hiss of air coming out of the suspension. Suddenly it stops. A few moments where I can only hear myself breathing and my heart pounding before I hear another truck approach and then drive by. I spent the next few hours waiting for whatever it was to come back, but it never did. In the morning I couldn't find any footprints or damage to my truck, but on every window were tiny human-looking handprints, like a toddler had licked their hand and stuck it to my window over and over. Not a trucker, but I'd a college teammate from Miami tell a story that he swears on to this day. He and his girlfriend were making the drive to Naples late night on a two-lane road through the Everglades and had been in a line of cars behind an 18-wheeler for multiple miles. She fell asleep and he was surfing for something to listen to on the radio. Only one station came in clearly enough to be tolerable, so he gave it a listen. He came on and said something along the lines of, "The stars are extra bright in the Everglades tonight. If you're driving through there, pull off and take a look." He said he normally wouldn't even think of it, but for some reason felt compelled to that night. He woke up his girlfriend. She was annoyed and didn't want to, but he convinced her it would be worth it. They stopped and just took in the stars for 5–10 minutes. He said it was the most amazing sky he's ever seen. They get back on the road and drive another few minutes and come across a massive accident. The truck they were following had jackknifed and took out a handful of vehicles that were following. He said there were multiple fatalities, but I've never been able to find a news story about it to confirm. Probably would have been in 2005-ish. They most likely would have been involved if not for that rant MGD on the only radio station to come in that night. My dad drove a truck between Edinburgh and London and tells this story often. He was driving down the motorway and looked to his right, saw a woman with a mistrunchable bun, as he describes it, staring at him with a terrified expression from a car next to him. Before he really knows how to react, the car pulls off at the next exit, and my dad, although shaken, carries on. About half an hour later, a different car with a different driver pulls alongside my dad with the same woman in the passenger seat, with the same expression on her face. My dad thinks, "Fuck this," and plans to pull into the next services to report, as even if it's nothing misunderstanding, better to be safe than sorry. Right. Anyway, the car disappears before he can get any details, plates, etc., and thinks there is no point calling the police with no details, so he carries on driving. Literally about 4 hours later, almost in London, yet another car pulls alongside him with the same woman, same mistrunchable hair, same terrified expression, except this time she appears to be screaming at my dad through the window. So my dad pulls over into a levee and calls the police. Apparently they have received 3 other calls about the same woman car in the same area in the last few minutes. It is unfortunately anticlimactic, as he never heard anything more about it, but he didn't see her again and although he kept an eye on the news, didn't see anything about it. Hopefully, it's just a giant coincidence. Who knows? Driving through an abandoned section of Baltimore at 3 in the morning, my CB radio turned itself on and crackled for a bit. Out of nowhere, some voice over the radio said in a deep southern drawl, "I ain't got no panties on." I could see up and down the interstate for miles, and saw not one set of heads. Not technically a truck driver, but I used to work as a field technician in the oil industry, so I spent a lot of time driving through remote areas of Canada at odd hours. One very strange and eerie experience sticks with me. I was in either Northeast BS or Northwest Alberta. I can't remember the exact location, driving late at night, when I noticed a very large black shape on the road in front of me. Thinking it was a moose, I stepped on the brakes, coming to a stop only a few feet from it. Despite being so close, and having my headlights shining directly on it, I still couldn't tell what I was looking at. It was vaguely the shape of a four-legged animal, but very big, probably about 6 feet tall. Aside from that, it was completely featureless. I couldn't make out any details whatsoever. No shine from its eyes, nothing. And then I noticed there were more of them in the ditch on both sides of the road. 5 or 6, or maybe more, all the same as the black shape on the road in front of me. None of them were moving. They didn't look like physical objects or living things, more like just large patches of absolute darkness. After I got over my shock, dread started to set in, and I drove around the thing on the road and sped off. I don't really believe this was a paranormal experience. I had been driving for 8 hours through the middle of the night, and I was exhausted. Most likely, it was a hallucination caused by lack of sleep and spending too long staring straight ahead into the dark. But it was still a very unsettling experience. A good buddy of mine is a long-haul trucker for my company. A few months ago, he woke up in a parking lot surrounded by police. Some dude had gotten shot and dumped 15 feet from his truck. Literally reposting my comment from another thread just like this. I work for a railroad. Not necessarily remote, but sometimes it's just a conductor and engineer cruising along 10 fun, very isolated, fairly wooded track. I've heard a few older guys mention something about a family or a man with a suitcase, something along those lines. I don't really remember walking down the track with no concerns. Constant blowing of the horn, flashing of the lights, etc. It just kept walking down the track, then disappearing. Near Weatherly, Pie. I also experienced a pretty intense trip myself one night coming home from New Jersey. Saw my first dead body laying along the rail, which in itself was kinda interesting, when the only other part of my trip where we were required to run at a slow speed. I heard the craziest blood-curdling scream I have ever heard in my entire life. One of the nights I will probably remember until I retire. I'm not a truck driver, but the story is from a truck driver. I was working the overnight shift from Friday night into Saturday morning at a gas station. At about 6 a.m. Semi pulls into the fuel aisle. Driver gets out and almost runs into the store, clearly shaken. His face is completely white and he is obviously upset. My first thought was the poor man had hit someone on the road. We get a lot of drunks walking across a 4-lane highway in front of the store. So I ask what's wrong. Hal looks at me for a second and is like, "I'm not crazy, no." I'm thinking, great time he roll on and this guy is losing it. I say, of course not. I just saw something huge on the side of the road like a deer or bear. We had a bear get in the dumpster last week, no bigger than a bear on its back legs, made a big person. It picked up a dead buck on the side of the road and carried it over its shoulder into the woods. I can only stare at him. My brain cannot deal with this information this late in a shift. A local comes up to the counter to get his usual, and the guy tells him the story. The local says, "That's the Bigfoot that lives near the county line." The truck driver and I are both looking at this guy like he has two heads. He has to be joking. This trucker pays for his fuel at record speed and leaves never to be seen again. The local still insists it's Bigfoot. I just don't got in the woods cause I don't know. Not technically a truck, driver, but my cousin works at a truck stop in Kansas. She told me about some guy who parked his truck and got out. A woman got out of the passenger seat. It was kinda cold, so the trucker was wearing a coat and hat, but the woman was wearing summer cloths. My cousin thought nothing of it and did her whole "Hi, welcome," and trucker bought a coffee, but the woman just stood there in the doorway. Now my cousin was freaked out. She didn't want to be rude, but she was a teenage girl alone in a gas station in the middle of nowhere. "Excuse me, miss, do you need anything?" "She is good, who are you talking to?" the truck driver asked when he got to the checkout. "Woman who got out of your truck." My cousin pointed, but the woman had disappeared, and told me she had never seen a look of pure terror on a man's face. He just whispered a quiet tone, "Oh," got his coffee and left. The woman did not get back into his truck, and my cousin couldn't find her in the store. Says it was one of the most terrifying experiences she had ever had while on that job. Around 2006-ish, I was driving flatbed, picked up a load of construction material, drywall, roofing. Don't remember, but it was prepackaged in boxes, and I remember having to use strap protectors on the load in rural Tennessee. Memory is foggy now, but I want to say it was between Memphis and Nashville, but closer to the intersection of the Miss-Alton state lines. Tarp required, so I strapped everything down, tarped the load, and left the shipper. About 5 miles down the road, in the middle of nowhere woods on a two-lane road, I noticed my tarp flapping in the wind, found a wide shoulder and pulled over to fix it. I realized that I just flat did a shitty job tarping this load and decide to redo it on the side of the road and wool the bungee straps, drag the tarps off, roll them back up, climb up on the load and start unrolling the tarps again, and as see a guy walking down the same side of the road I'm on, coming towards my truck. I don't think anything about it other than to keep an eye on him, cause I'm in the middle of nowhere, and continue what I'm doing. About the time I have tarps set in place and am climbing down to start hooking the bungee straps back on, this dude is getting close enough and I'm now paying more attention to him than I am to tarping my load. I grab my winch bar and set it on the trailer where I'm working, just in case. 8-pound solid metal bar about 4 feet long, tapered to a blunt point on one and then hollow on the other, used for tightening straps and chains, etc. The guy gets to me, and the first thing I notice is his hair. It's like a mullet, but it's patchy as fuck, like he tried to cut his own hair and had a seizure in the process and said fuck it good enough to party. The next thing I notice were his eyes, which I can only describe as off, like they were clear. I didn't think he was drunk or high or anything, but it also gave me the distinct impression that the elevator didn't go all the way up. Clothes were dirty and not well maintained, with dirty white tennis shoes, cause I remember he didn't have laces on one shoe and the tongue was noticeably out of place. He stops by me, waits until I acknowledge him, and just says, "I've got a long walk." I'm like, "Yeah, and you do. We're in the middle of nowhere," making it clear there's no ride to be had here. He nods, starts walking by me, continuing on his way, stops at about the driver door on my truck and turns around, comes back to me and repeats himself, "I've got a long walk." At this point, I explain that I can't give him a ride, insurance and all that, apologize for not being able to help him out, and he seems to accept this, turns around and leaves. I wait for him to get a little ways away from my truck and start working on finishing the tarp job. I still keep an eye on him, and he's moving away from me. As I'm putting on the last of the bungee straps, I look over to check where he's at, and he's turned around, heading back towards me, now about 100 yards in front of my truck and coming back my way. It looks like he's talking on a cell phone, has his hand up to his face, and I can barely make out his mouth moving, his other hand waving like he's having a conversation with someone. I finish with the straps, grab my winch bar, and am climbing into my truck as he's about 10 yards away now. Soon as I'm in the cab, I lock the doors and set the winch bar on the passenger seat just in case. I look at the guy and realize he's not talking on a phone. He's talking to his fucking hand, and now I'm nervous, 'cause he doesn't look like he's having a nice pleasant chat. It looks more like an angry conversation. Crank the truck up, put it in gear, and just pull out. Didn't look for traffic or anything. As I pass him, he's just looking at me, still holding his hand to his face, with this dead-ass look on his face, just staring at me. Gave me the creeps. About the time I hit fifth or sixth gear, I look in the mirror, and there's no one there. Not a truck driver, but I've spent the past 4 years driving every day night for work. I was in a fairly rural part of Mississippi, somewhere between Clarksdale and Greenwood. Important note, it's all-to-lane highway, the 250-mile drive home. The weather had turned pretty sour as I was leaving Clarksdale. I called my wife, told her there was high wind advisories and very possible tornado threats throughout the Delta, and I'd call her as soon as I made it to a safe area again. I had already been working for 14 hours when I got in the truck, so I had ate dinner and grabbed some coffee to stay awake and alert. Now, if you've never driven through flat farm and at night for 100 miles, it's very fatiguing and spooky without inclement weather. We had driven maybe 30 miles out into the farmland when hail started bouncing off my truck. Being a Miss Native, I knew in July hail meant tornado. I pull off to the side. I'm in the middle of nowhere, all lights to be seen, no cars behind or in front of me, and start looking for the storm tornado I believe is approaching. I rolled the passenger window down and shined a bright flashlight off into the night. Nothing there. Turned to the driver's side, and this guy has his face pushed against the glass, grinning from ear to ear. I screamed, and he was gone. I slammed the truck in drive and took off. We have all the time running cameras on our trucks. I got to the first safe place to stop and called my wife. I didn't want to scare her, so I didn't mention the guy or the hailstorm. I did, however, pull the CD card and check the camera. I promise you this guy never popped up on my front or rear cameras. I've always played it off as my imagination. I will say I don't drive through the Delta in the dark anymore if I don't absolutely have to. Not sure if this story is creepy, but it's definitely scary. My father was a truck driver in East Africa in the 80s and early 90s. During the years leading up to the Rwandan genocide, my father was passing through Rwanda. He reached a checkpoint and was forcibly removed from his truck at gunpoint. Apparently he looked like he belonged to the Tutsi tribe, and they put him in a cage with other Tutsi prisoners. He tried communicating that he isn't Rwandan, but no one spoke the same language as him. Every night, they would take about 5 people from the cage and slaughter them in front of him. After the 3rd night, he saw a man that spoke a little bit of Swahili, which Maidad spoke, and told him that he's not Rwandan and showed him his ID. Somehow that guy got him out, and he was handed the keys to his truck and was on his way. I've seen some rather screwed up stuff over the years, from bad wrecks, drug addicts, panhandlers, and more. There used to be a small rest area in North Dakota on US 52 at the intersection of D30 near Sikeston. I came out of the building after using the facilities and got ready to leave. As I was starting to pull out, a guy opened and his car door. The angle was just right to see that he was buck naked. Then he gets out of his car and starts walking around his car. I'm not sure if he was a druggie or just thought this is a good way to pick up a truck driver I've never met before. I just drove away and didn't look back. Maybe that isn't creepy in the sense that I meant it, but I thought it was. One story that was creepy to me was that I was driving across Kansas on I-70 headed west. There is a pretty long stretch out there that's just a couple little towns and not much else. As the night wore on, I realized I had been passed several times by this beat-up old motor home. Several people sat with their noses almost pressed to the window, watching me with creepy interest as they passed. Every time. And I never noticed where I passed them at. A couple times I swear they passed me twice where there was no rest areas or exits to pull off at. I would have seen them stopped somewhere, but yet here they were passing me again. They all looked like some variant of Charles Manson or some other freaky type. Had me pretty uptight by the time I got to the top truck stop in Lemon and stopped for the night. And almost every driver I know has seen stuff late at night that just can't be explained. Maybe it's fatigue, or maybe not. But I've seen very large man-like shadows cross the road way too fast for their size several times. I ain't saying it's a Bigfoot. Never got a clear view, was always out at the end of the headlights, where I couldn't be entirely sure I even seen anything. But it sure looked like a large something crossing a whole road in just a couple of steps. Really weird. As a crew guy of an off-road racing team in Baja California, Mexico, I got to test drive some rigs and trucks. So technically truck driver. We were driving down south along Sea of Court, as with a buddy at night at this 4-hour dirt road to Gonzaga, which is pretty much in the middle of fucking nowhere in the desert. And we see the lights of a car behind coming down fast and now effectively tailing us, and the bastard had bar mount headlights on top, or what seemed like it, which are super bright. It's normal, or was that locals and gringos get wasted in the nearest now former do-COVID spring breaker town and then go down this road super fast to test their rigs since there's no police there. So I try waving him off to get the guy to keep them like slow, since he's blinding us, but he isn't slowing down a bit nor turn his roof lights off, and it was a dangerous super dark road. Finally, near a curve near the shore, I found a spot to bail off the road without crashing, and we see lights passing by us super fast and going straight to the curve, and we were like, that's it. He is going to crash down to the sea, but the lights didn't fall and kept going straight into the beach and the sea, and then pitched up abruptly to the night sky and disappeared. We didn't say a word for a minute or so, and then my buddy goes, "Did you see it?" And I say, "The fucking flying truck." Didn't talk about anymore, as simply it didn't make sense to talk about it or with anyone else when we arrived. FedEx contractor. I'm in one of those big box trucks. Anyways, I finished a long delivery day, and I swear to whatever fucking gods you believe in that I was hearing voices in my cab. It wasn't the radio, it wasn't my tinnitus, it wasn't my subconscious. I was hearing whispered voices in my ear that were coming from the passenger seat. The voices continued even after I had gotten back to my hub, clocked out, and hopped in my own car to go home. They only stopped when I left the parking lot. It only happened that night. I still have no fucking idea what the hell it was, because I had ruled everything else out. Driving through a national park in the middle of the night, going through a slow stretch at about 30 milking, so often I think I see something put the my window, and beside me, just a glimpse of movement. When I occur, though I don't catch it. Finally, on about the third time, I whip my head around, and this time I recognize it's a huge black wolf following alongside my truck just off the highway. I only saw it for a few seconds before Jay had to focus back on the road, but it was absolutely lovely yet unsettling. The obligatory not a truck driver but a second-hand story. I heard my great-uncle drove big trucks. Living in the middle of nowhere, sometimes people would leave trash on the road, and since he had a big truck, he'd just smash into said boxes or paper and continue on. One day he was coming up on a cardboard box and just had the urge to swerve and miss this one. He misses it and passes by with no incident, looks in his rear view to look at the box, and out pops a kindergarten-age little kid that just heads back to their house as nothing happened. My uncle was a long-haul trucker for almost 30 years. He did a lot of runs through Texas and said that some of the small towns gave him a weird vibe, like he absolutely didn't belong there as an outsider and should just make his delivery and leave ASAP. I worked at the Nevada nuclear test site, decommissioning old buildings. How much time do you have? Lol. One of the creepiest days was when I was sent with an dumpload of non-hazmat material to the general landfill, which I had never been to before. Somehow I missed the turn and ended up at an armed gate with machine guns pointed at me. Very uncomfortable. Once I explained my mistake, I was quite hastily turned around, still not knowing exactly where my turn was. A very nondescript desert road was what I was looking for. I headed back. I turned on the next dirt road I came to and ended up at the Sedan crater. Went and smoked a cigarette on the observation deck all by my lonesome. My hands were still shaking from the run-in with the armed gardener was when delivering a hazmat load to Area 25. They had begun using robots to guard the area. They were still in beta testing, and someone may have just been fucking with me. But the damn thing perceived my truck as a threat and blocked my ability to move. I went inside the building, and 15 minutes later it had moved on. Driving through rural Visty area with the crazy melted rock look. No plants or anything, just rock and sand. Monsoon time, raining cats and dogs just pouring so hard you could barely see going 20. Thunder and lightning just rocking the car, sometimes turning into hail and pounding you. Just a nasty storm make 'em around a corner, and the whole countryside legit on fire, like 20 hundreds of yards in all directions, while pouring rain at dusk. Just rocks and dirt wildly on fire in the pouring rain. Just slowly drove on. Was totally freaky and surreal. Honestly, thought I may have hallucinated. Check the news. A propane trucks lit off the road going way too fast and apparently busted open pretty violently and lit on fire. Never saw the truck. Must have been behind something. Felt a bit bad after about not stopping. Not a truck driver, but I have one weird story from when I was a kid. My parents always took us on long road trips every summer, and my dad liked to take meandering routes through rural towns to see all the tourist traps. One trip, we passed through a little town in Illinois, the kind you miss if you sneeze. This one had mannequins. Every house and business was only populated by mannequins. I don't remember seeing any people. Everything looked maintained and clean, so someone was at least caring for the place. There weren't any signs or anything indicating it was for tourists. Just a convenience store-based shop with a sign rating "Eat here, get worms." I've got a few being stalked by. My gut says a skinwalker outside of Cedar City, but I've told that one elsewhere on Reddit. One of the worst was when I was parked at a dirt turnout in the Arizona desert between Cameron and Page for the night. This is out in Navajo country, I believe. About 12 I woke up to scratching at the window of my sleeper. Went on for about 15 minutes. I'm sitting there in the dark, scared to death, wondering what the fuck's happening with my Bowie knife in my hand. After it ended, I waited another 15 minutes or so before out and my curtain and looked out the windows. Couldn't see anything outside, and I was still the only one parked there. Got out the next morning, and all I found were some footprints coming to the truck and eventually walking back into the desert. Haven't parked there since. I always stop at a small truck stop in Cameron now. My father's told me this story maybe 1,000 times. My family, as well as a couple of uncles, and my oldest cousin went on a trip from Mexico City to Acapulco when I was barely a year old. Back home in the middle of the night, the good old days when you could travel at night. The car broke down, and a police car quickly came to our help. There were 3 policemen in the car, and the chief offered to take my dad to the nearest gas station where he could find a mechanic, and told the other 2 officers to stay with our car. My dad says they seemed absolutely not pleased with the order until the chief told them, "Don't worry, there's a woman and 2 children." That seemed to calm the 2 officers to the gas station on the police car. My dad asked the chief what was all that about. The chief told him that there had been many accidents in that part of the road. That's why they were able to find our car so quickly. All of the accidents involved young men traveling without female or child company. Those who had survived said that they crashed because they could see a very beautiful woman next to the road. But once they came close to her, she turned out to be just a rotting corpse staring at them, and they crashed because they were paralyzed by fear. Not me, but an ex-girlfriend's cousin's uncle. Yeah, I know it's a friend of a friend situation, but it was a well-known tale among the family. I was driving on a Mexican road at night. He felt a call of nature, so he parked on the sideway and jumped off the truck. He walked to relieve himself, and while doing that he felt a presence beside him. He pointed his flashlight at his side and saw, standing beside him, a small deformed person. It was naked and had his face bloated, and he was standing just there. The driver, ex-Gef's cousin's uncle, ran away to his truck, jumped in, and drove away from there. It's been a lot since I talked with my ex. We're cool, but not too much in touch. But if you want to know more, I could ask her about the fuzzy details. Not me, but my mom told me a story about one late night out trucking. Her husband was sleeping in the back, and she was starting to get super tired and struggling to stay awake. She heard another trucker on the VJ and started chatting with him. He helped her stay awake for the run until she stopped off at a truck stop until her husband could take over Knoxville 100. That next morning, she told her husband what happened, and he told her the VJ was broken, and that was impossible. I've been reading this thread for 20 minutes and it's 12:42 a.m. I am so tired, but I can't sleep. Pod damn, this shit scares me. Truck driving. Many years ago, I did that. Long hours and always tired because the dispatcher always thought you were behind. But there were some good stories. This one guy, when he saw another company truck at a rest stop and the driver was sleeping over the steering wheel, he would put on this gorilla mask he had and stand on the running board and knock on the window. Of course, the driver invariably almost suffered a heart attack, and a couple even chased him around threatening great bodily harm. He was sitting in my truck one day waiting to load in a line of other trucks. One guy opens his door and stands on the running board like he is pissing off the side, except he has this huge dildo in his hand. The next truck coming around the corner, the driver stared wide-eyed at this guy, who then proceeded to casually tap the huge penis against the hot exhaust pipe as if he is shaking off a couple of piss drops. The other driver almost hit the building. My uncle is a truck driver in Guatemala, small town with just a single road that passes through. I used to love sitting outside at night on the hammock, listening to his chilling stories. I'll start with the scariest tone. Can you see them? My uncle said he hired a guy from town to help him drive late shifts at night with him. Of the road. Story was, the guy had somehow managed to burn a house down as a kid and has since claimed to see the dead. Would occasionally swerve on the roads at nothing, or worse. My uncle said he would be sitting around when the guy would say, "I see a little girl on the swing." My aunt said he would say things like that often. Apparently he learned to live with it, or some scary third world shit. Whoa. The Kavami uncle said one night he was sleeping above the trailer bed when suddenly, in the distance, he could see a small light approaching. As it got closer, he had a chilling realization. He described seeing a really old, wrinkly woman who held a candle, draped in dark gowns. He said her nails were so long they curled. She walked into a cave opening and disappeared. My uncle said he noped out there real fast fray. The horse me uncle often likes to talk about spirits. He said one night while sleeping, a giant rabbit horse tried to climb onto his truck. It would rock it back and forth, and the truck weighs an ungodly amount. He said when the rocking stopped, he jumped in and left. Eyes is just the stories that I have from Uncle. I have also experienced paranormal stuff, and so has my family. Banging on the back windows with no one there, lights flashing at 3 a.m., and countless others. Guatemala's no joke, lol. Not a truck driver. But years ago, I was driving with my ex-girlfriend back from a wedding in northern Wisconsin heading towards Madison where she lived. We were probably like 20 or 30 miles away from the city at that point, and it was probably around 1 a.m. My Gips, which was some really cheap brand that might have got me as a gift from Radio Shack, had me going through some backcountry highways for some reason after I had stopped for gas instead of getting me back on the expressway right away. I didn't mind. I kind of always found those really peaceful, even though at night they are pretty creepy. My girlfriend was asleep in passenger's seat, so I had turned down the music really quiet to not wake her, which added a bit to the eeriness of it all. I'm like really into this groove of driving, focused on the roads because it was so dark, without streetlighted everywhere. Then something on the side of the road catches my eye. It was a giant mountain lion with what appeared to be blood all over its face. I start shaking my girlfriend awake to get her to see it before it was gone, but she woke up too late. I pulled over to the side of the road and asked her to watch the rear view so she could see this huge thing cross the road. But It never did. She was convinced that I imagined it all because that area of Wisconsin is not known for mountain lions, but I swear I saw it. Well, one time I delivered 5 gallons of tomato juice to a dilapidated suburban California ranch house in the middle of the night. The guy who came to the door was wearing all black and had greased back black hair, and the house was lit by candles, and Bela Lugosi's Dead was playing in the background. Luckily, I'm not a virgin by any stretch. Not me. But my Costa Rican tour guide told us a really scary story that happened to a former employee of his who would drive a truck carrying construction-related shit to different sites. Mind you, where they were building was miles away from the nearest city. A lot of Costa Rica's preserved jungle. Luckily, the government is environmentally conscious and isn't just cutting everything down like Brazil is now. Anyway, this dude was the first, not the only, to have this happen to him. Apparently, when he was driving behind a line of construction trucks on their way to the site late at night, he saw a white pale woman throw herself in the way of the trucks in front of him. He yelled it into their radio to stop and check for her, but when they stopped, they didn't find a body mold, and no one saw her except him. This happened again on the same trip, and yet again, when they stopped, they couldn't find the girl, and no one except the guy who called it anything. The other workers thought he was high or something. One other time he had to go out to the site by himself at night. It had been some time after the incident with the pale woman, so he didn't think it was a big deal. He exited the car at one point to take a leak near a clearing, and that's when he felt it started to get really cold. He turned around, and peering out from a tree in the distance, he saw the same pale woman staring at him. Dude booked it back to his car and got in the driver's seat, turned it on, and was about to speed teeth out when he took one last look at his left side rear view mirror and saw her mama closer and still looking at him. He kept that story to himself, thinking no one would believe him, until a new worker claimed to see the same thing and told my tour guide their boss. When the boss told the truck driver what the new guy saw, the truck driver told him about the second encounter with the woman in the forest. Creepy shit. Fucked up. He drove the car the second time, not a truck. Reno, a place on the north side of town, way off the freeway towards an old military road. I got there early, like 1 a.m. They didn't open till 6 a.m. The facility was closed, so no one around, and I just pulled into the lot and parked off to the side. So I went to sleep and was woken shortly after to someone knocking on the door window, firmly, to the point the truck shook. I jump out of bed thinking, they are there already and want to offload me. I get to the door and no one is there, so I step down thinking they are behind the trailer looking at the door seal or something. No one around. I look under the truck, and around absolutely no one. No wind or bad weather. Not another person around. I jump in the truck and pull out of there as fast as I could and went and parked in a nearby truck stop. Still can't explain it. I mean, I guess I can justify it. I could have imagined the sound of the truck shaking was definitely real, so I don't know. Grandpa drove rig for most of his life. A lot of times when he would sleep in Detroit, he'd be woken up the sound of fire trucks putting out house fires that were from arson. A few years back I was driving home after a shift. It was 3 or 4 a.m. and I was tired, but not exhausted. This a deserted state route in the middle of nowhere, and it's pretty common not to see a single car during the 30-mile trip. I drive this road multiple times a week. It's mostly open fields and some farm land through this 30-mile stretch. This particular night it was cold, but the sky was clear, like no clouds or anything. And I actually love nights like this because you can see the stars so well without light pollution. Anyway, about halfway back home, I come over this hill to a 2 or 3 mile straight stretch. A huge, dark object about the length of a pickup truck, but far rounder and thicker, catches my attention as it's just hovering about 50 feet in the air, 50 or 60 feet off the road over a farm field. There's a very bright red light coming out of the side or bottom. I couldn't tell exactly where it originated from because it was so bright as I was going about 5 miles past it. I only had a few seconds to look at it, but the image is burned into my mind. I have no idea what it was. I wanted to turn around, but I was kinda freaked out. I'm sure alien life exists somewhere, but as for visiting our planet, I'd know. But if I ever had to paint a picture of what I think a folk would look like, I'd paint whatever the fuck I saw that night. Unfortunately, I haven't seen anything odd over that area since that night. Years ago, I read an answer on a thread with this question about a guy who was riding with his truck driver father as a child. They were in the middle of nowhere and they were coming up on a person laying in the road with no one else around, no cars, etc. His dad blew the horn. They didn't move. He blew it again as he got closer. They didn't move. He told his son to put his head down and cover his eyes, and he ran the person over. When they looked back, a bunch of people who were previously hiding were running out of the woods, and the gist was that his dad knew it was a setup for a robbery or worse, and wasn't chancing it with his child in the car. No clue if it was true or not, but I think about that story all the time. I was on a long haul, eastbound, nothing but me, the miles, and the night. On runs like this I fall into a zone with the hum of the tires and vibration of the road coaxing me into a rhythm, not noticing details along the way. Illinois, Indiana, the long drag of Ohio, Pennsylvania. The miles rolled on. Slowly I realized something had changed. I was seeing lights. The farther I went, the more there were. Suddenly I jerked to attention with the realization what was happening. Oh God, oh fuck. I was in Philadelphia. Creepy bugger who lived on a ranch in the middle of nowhere wanted to show me his depace man cave basement and wouldn't stop hitting on me while I'm just trying to deliver some damn stone. Thank fuck I had my winch bar and pepper spray. I literally dropped shit as fast I could cause I already unstrapped and had my forklift down. Told the boss I'll never go back after. Only reason I didn't flat out run for it anyways was cause I was driving a 3-ton F machine and I didn't see a gun. My lil forklift is quick fuck in tiny ass chick, and the company sent out a Jimbro ripped coworker next. That dude got the same treatment from the creepy guy and thought he was gonna get kidnapped too. Ugh. In like 3 years doing this shit, that's the only time I've been worried like that. They stopped sending people after David came back scared to probably not the type of creepy op is looking for but waitives. I'm not a truck driver, and this isn't involving a truck, but here's my story. I was driving on a cross-country road trip through the middle of nowhere, Kansas, when I had one of my tires blow out. I pulled over and went to call AAA, but I had no service on my phone, so I got out and started the process of trying to change the tire myself. After a very short while, a cop pulled up and asked if I needed help. I said, yes, thank you, officer. And he said, because you're in luck. I just so happened to know the best tow truck driver. He could take you into town and you could get all fixed up, no problem. The mosquitoes were eating me alive, and frankly, I only had a donut-style replacement tire and no clue how to properly change it. So I said yes, please, and the officer gave the tow truck a call. After another short while, the tow truck arrived and the officer left. The driver asked, where am I towing you to? So I was like, I'm not sure. To town, I guess. Somewhere where I can get my tire fixed. He said, well, you're in luck, cause I know the guy at the only place that's open right now who can fix that for you. I said, okay, sounds good. And he towed us to the auto repair place. This was basically a ghost town, if you could even call it a town. The tow truck driver and the repair guy sat around and bullshitted for a couple of hours while my tire was being fixed. Bear in mind, there was nobody else there but me and passengers. There was nobody else anywhere within sight. The town was empty except for the gas station connected to the repair place. Finally, they came out and said I was all set and gave me both my bills, one for the repair and one for the tow. $1,200 in total for one tire and a 5-mile tow for a 1991 Random, that wasn't even worth that much. I was furious but had no options, so I gave him my credit card, and he was like, "Sorry, guy. We're a cash-only kind of town, hee hee." I was like, "Okay then. Well, I don't have any cash on me, so how we going to settle this up then?" And he was like, "Well, you're in luck, 'cause there's an at next door at the gas station my buddy owns." So I went to the gas station and took out the maximum I could on 3 on 4 different cards, each with a $20 withdrawal fee. I looked behind the counter, and in addition to the gas station attendant there stood the cop, the tow truck driver, and the repair guy, all munching on Doritos and having a good laugh. I'm pretty sure I got hosed and potentially maybe even sabotaged. Looking back, that cop sure arrived really quickly, and my other 3 tires were all still relatively new. I had to cut my trip short and invest in cortisone cream for the million mosquito bite strelled. Kansas ghost town folk drained me of $1,200, and I'm pretty sure they were highway pirates. Not a truck driver, but was on the final leg of a 16-hour drive from Florida to northern Ohio with a caravan of about 8 cars and half of us drivers, most of us up for 12 hours at this point, and everyone else in the cars sound asleep, where we saw a man walking his dog on the side of I-75 in the middle of nowhere between Cincinnati and Dayton at 3. To this day still don't know if that was real or we were hallucinating, but either way it was pretty creepy. Top 3 posts. I'm not a truck driver, but not truck driving and not tired hallucinations. I had 3 friends helping me around midnight one night get a big toolbox into a storage unit before I could PCs to Texas. After offered to take them to Waffle House for food as payments, since it was about the only place open at the time. We left the unit around 12 and made our way to the Waffle West, driving through the Chickamauga battlefield in Georgia to get to it. The place is terrifying to drive through on a regular night, but my friend and I thought we would have some fun with the other 2 who didn't grow up in the area. They didn't know any of the ghost stories of the park, so we told them some while we were driving to kind of spook them a bit. Ghosts on the sides of the road. Green Eyes, the mysterious, ghostly panther creature. The hill your car will roll up when off. Rear view mirror ghosts. The works. We took a turn down a side road that leads to an old bridge that has the old stop and turn your engine off and it won't turn back on story. We get to the bridge, stop, and turn off the engine, sit for a minute, start it up, and kept driving with no problems. Nothing happened. Just some harmless college kid fun. We drive over it and go around a corner, and standing in a ditch is a black mass just larger than a man. It doesn't move really, and even though the headlights span across it directly, none of us can tell what it is. It's just black. All 4 of us screamed, and I gassed it out of there, nearly sliding in a ditch to get away. All of us saw it, and none of us could explain what it was, and still have no idea. Not a truck driver, but this still haunts me. Was driving from Chicago to Tampa to move with my dad. Somewhere in the middle of Georgia at 12. I'm mindlessly driving when my dad yells, "Yo, pay attention to the fucking red lights." Tons of cars ahead of us are stopped, smoke in the air. We slowly approach, and first thing we see is are completely engulfed in flames. Then all of a sudden an 18-wheeler starts bouncing, like how some people put hydraulics in their little pimp cars. Big boy was bouncing with flames coming out the back. I honked at the rubberneckers in front of me because I didn't want to see the explosion, and there were already 12 cars pulled over, too many cooks in the kitchen. The most surreal thing I had ever seen. Someone later told us it was the brake system. Looked like a demon-possessed truck. Not exactly creepy, but definitely terrifying. My father was a truck driver, and he was driving through a smaller town in Northern California hauling tomatoes. Suddenly he got incredibly tired, wasn't low on sleep or deprived at all, but ended up passing out at the wheel. Last thing he saw was the light of the town in front of him. He woke up about 2 hours later on the other side of town, perfectly parked on the side of the road. He swears something was looking out for him that night. Not my story, but my mom's. She used to drive long trips to Mississippi. One day she drove over the Mississippi River and saw some huge animal swimming in the water. She says it was almost as big as the trailer she was hauling. Welp, that's enough Reddit for tonight. Not a truck driver, but I was field merchandiser, so I drive all over to different grocery stores. One route was all Walmarts in West Virginia. In between Charlestown and Beckley, I decided to do no tolls since I had no cash coins on me. The views are amazing, and I was just driving down these small roads mesmerized. I stopped off the road next to a creek to get out and take some pics. It was in the middle of the afternoon, too. As I'm looking up the stream, I see 3 tall 15 feet white crosses on the other side. This struck me as very strange, and I instantly felt like I probably shouldn't be outside of my vehicle. It gave me a strong True Detective Season 1 vibe. As I'm processing this, 2 figures emerged from trees near the crosses. They were just a father and son and probably harmless, but I immediately noped right out of there and got in my car and pulled away. My scary story is Nebraska. The only good thing coming out of Nebraska is me leaving. One time I was driving a big truck full of mailers to and from Atlanta in February. In the middle of the night, like when we are in the middle of nowhere, we are cruising, and my girlfriend passenger suddenly sits up straight with a pullover now. So I'm like, what? She's like, now, pullo. Right now. So I do. We sit there for a few minutes and I'm all tough. And she's like, I'd know. Okay, whatever, let's just keep going. It was a feeling and intuition. So we pull back on the highway, crest the next hill, and before us is a huge accident, with wheels still spinning on turned over cars. Smoke, fire. It just happened. No cops yet. We would have been in that many car wreck for certain if we hadn't pulled off. Lesson: always trust your girl's intuition. I was in the middle of absolutely nowhere in Texas and getting so tired, and there were absolutely no lights anywhere around me but the stars. I guess I kinda messed up a turn at one of those forks in the road when a calm voice came loud over the CB. Driver, looks like it's time for you to pull over and grab some sleep, so I did. I'm not ignoring Invisible Citizen Ben. Jesus. I stayed in a Holiday Inn Express last night, so I think that qualifies me to be a truck driver. I-40 west of Abga. Narrowly missed hitting a car in both lanes. A late night in O traffic. Walk back to car. Car is running with radio playing. No one's in car. Blood on steering wheel. Well, nothing paranormal, but something out of a strange biology book. I was driving a person in my care from the clinic out of state back home. It started to rain and I was on a very rural road due to a detour, and frogs were coming out onto the road in droves. The whole road was jumping and moving. The car started to slide around on the frog carcasses. I had to drive about 20 mph just to stay reliably on the road. I must have killed thousands of frogs that day. Not a creepy one per southeast, but anytime I haul through Navajo Nation in New Mexico, it's fucking terrifying. One night it's pitch black, and there's an old man as aged as death walking along the right side, and he stops and turns to hitchhike. But as I get closer, he's just staring at me and moving closer from the shoulder into the road. I have to swerve to the left not to kill him. My uncle was driving between Great Falls and Helena at around 3. He had his high beams on as it was a lonely drive and quiet highway. In the distance, he saw something cross the median and started to slow his approach, thinking it was a deer. As he got closer, he realized it was standing up, and so he slowed down to about 30 mph. He realized what it was and started to panic. A man in blue coveralls with a pig's head. Not a mask, but literally the head of a pig on his shoulder. My uncle moved to the left lane, and as he passed, Pig had lunged at the truck. My uncle didn't stop to check if he'd grabbed until he was in the safety of Helena. Nothing was out of the ordinary there, but on that stretch of road now, he doesn't slow down for anything. Not a truck driver, but I enjoy long road trips. Well, a couple times driving overnight and starting to get tired, I've seen the black dog. Not a truck driver, but I worked for a catering company once, and they had me drive the truck one morning at like 4:30 to deliver a shit ton of breakfast to some tech facility with engineers who do military contract stuff. Not a huge truck, but still a truck. I had no business driving. The assholes didn't fill in the tank, so I had to pull over to get gas. I was the only person at the gas station, and this older white Cadillac with tinted windows pulled up. This older gentleman in a nice suite jumped out and came running at me and started screaming in a thick possible Trinidadian or Guyanese accent, "Excuse me, sir. Excuse me. I have a quick question to ask." I said, "Sure, what's up?" He replied, "Do you know where the dead people are?" And got all bug-eyed. "Damned," said he. "No, I don't know any dead people," he replied. "Heaven, hell, reincarnated. If you aren't sure, you need to learn about Jehovah and his glory, brother." He then handed me a religious pamphlet that said what to do when a loved one died, that shows a photo of a hysterical crying woman holding her hysterical crying son. He then said, "Read this to learn about death," then walked back to his car. I sat there and thought, damn, that's a nice car and nice suit. Threw the pamphlet away and got a Swisher Sweet at the store, then left to go to deliver the food to the catering place. My dad was a truck driver, and I came along on short trips on weekends, and the one day we are cruising along and we hear a helicopter. A minute later there's a Huracan just flying above us about 400 feet up. But it wasn't just like 2 or 3 helicopters. It was like 30 or 40. I was really young, so military helicopters were really cool. Tell drive the black dog, you see it once, take the warning and pull over. Don't get greedy. It'll take everything you have and reach to 100, not a truck driver. But my dad has told me this story. He's not a trucker either, but he's done a lot of driving. Fortunately, he hasn't seen this creature either. Where's this thing called the black dog? It shows up when people get greedy, when truckers or drivers in general have been driving for so long, haven't seen their family, etc. This thing shows up to take everything you've got. It shows up in the middle of the road, often on isolated and dark roads, typically when the person is close to falling asleep and they see it. Swerve to avoid hitting it, since they think it's a dog or some sort of animal, and often end up in a fatal one-vehicle accident. To anyone here who does driving a lot, don't push your hours. The money isn't worth it. You see this dog, or whatever form it may take, you pull over immediately and rest. You get one warning, sometimes not even that. If you ignore the first one, it'll get you the second time. Hey, truck drivers, one of your kind forced me off the road in the middle of the night on I-5, in the middle of nowhere between CS and La. Anyone who's made this drive can attest to the vast emptiness of the long stretch of farmland that surrounds I-5 between Stockton, Vallarta, and Los Angeles, and how empty the road would be past mid-type lane highway. Middle of night, nobody on the road for hours but myself. I'm driving in the right lane, and eventually a semi with an open flatbed carrying a load of enormous industrial piping appears ahead of me. Speed limit on this stretch was 65 mph for trucks, 75 or 80 mph for passenger vehicles. I signal, get in the left lane, and pass the truck. I get some distance on him, but I stay in the left lane because I don't want the trucker to think I've cut him off. Also, it's the middle of the night and the road is otherwise completely empty, so why not just stay in the left lane till the truck disappears behind me? After a minute or so, I check my mirrors and see that I'm no longer gaining any ground on the truck. I'm maintaining a speed of about 80 mph, so he clearly started accelerating after I passed him. Well, he kept accelerating and gaining ground on me, must have been going 100 mph, and as soon as the cab of his truck was parallel with the front of my car, he started drifting into my lane. Without signal share wasn't full-sized shoulder on the left side, so I was run completely off the road and into a dirt field. I drove right into a giant wooden electric line pole, and I would have been killed if I hadn't reacted as fast as I did. Thankfully, my Jeep was able to handle it, and I was able to continue my journey after watching the trucker speed off at 100 mph again. No other cars or trucks on the road. No logical reason that I can fathom for his behavior. Truckers, why did this guy decide to run me off the road and nearly kill me? Okay, here goes. A while in high school, I used to hang out every Friday night a couple towns away with two friends. This was upstate in the mid-90s. The drive home was about 45 minutes up and through the mountains. There was one patch of road that had no houses or street lights for about 5–10 minutes straight, and always freaked me out a little seeing how dark it was. One night while I was driving this patch of road, my very worst fear occurred. The headlights from my car started to dim. Then I noticed not only the rest of the lights in the car dashboard starting to dim, but the entire car seemed to be running out of energy altogether. Before I knew it, the car started stalling and I had to pull over. I remember yelling, "No, no, please, no, Fuku." I was freaking the fuck out because this is how every alien abduction tale begins. When I finally stopped, it was pitch black. There was no light whatsoever except from the glare of the moon. I may not have been more scared in all my life. I gave it less than a minute, and I just kept trying to turn the car back on by twisting the key. It worked like a charm, and the car fully came back on, and I was able to get the hell out of there. Never found out why it happened to begin with. Story 2. Yet another Friday along the same patch of lightless road. This time, as I was driving, I looked up into the sky to my right and saw something large but very far away falling out of the sky, completely engulfed in fire. I've never seen anything like it, and especially the trail of fire. It was a literal fireball. I watched as it passed the mountains and disappeared. It being after midnight and desolate out, I imagine, and I must have just seen UFO crash. The next day I learned that pieces of the Russian space station were said to be falling to Earth after it lost orbit, and it was abandoned. And question: why do people say not a truck driver? But we're on Reddit. No one is going to ask to see a copy of your license. Just skip that sentence. Trust me, no one will know. Not a truck driver, but one night my friends and I were driving through a lightless valley around 1 a.m. Suddenly my headlights catch on an object in the middle of the road. I shit you not. It's a man made out of tumbleweed. We don't even have tumbleweed where I live. It appeared very suddenly, and I was so confused by its shape that I didn't brake or swerve as we collided with it. My friend and I in the front seat both screamed, but nothing, no impact. We drove right through it, but it was just air. Both of my friends in the big seat were very confused why the two of us in the front screamed, sued, and elo like it. I know it wasn't just me. My friend saw it too. I got stuck in between two remote towns in the middle of the mountains at night during winter. This was in northern BS in Canada. It was about 10 at night, and I couldn't make it up a hill in the snow. No cell phone reception, and am out on the side of the road in pitch black using my cell phone as a light while I put the chains on. Got them on and still couldn't get up the hill. Waited for a snowplow to drive by and followed him up the hill and still couldn't make it. Finally I had to give up and drive back into the town I had passed about 45 minutes back behind me and stay in a hotel. It felt creepy putting those chains on in the snow and pitch black. I was so angry at my dispatch for even forcing me to make it back when they did, as I knew it would be tough in the snow. Things could have been so much worse than they ended up being. Not a truck driver myself, but I like to accompany my stepfather from time to time. This one time, we were on this curvy road of just trees, not house, not even fences on the land behind the trees. As the hours pass, I start seeing a man, white rubber boots which were dirty, a vertically striped, light blue buttoned shirt, a blue cap, a cloth bag hanged from his right shoulder, and a long-ass machete hanging from his dusty jeans. I don't know why I remember him so clearly. For some reason, as we got closer and closer, he was just the same distance. I said, "Hey, we should offer him a ride. It's an empty road far from any town." My stepdad looks over and says, "Who? There's no one other than you and me." I said, "There is. Look over there in front. The man with the light blue shirt." This kept on for a few minutes back and forth until the man just disappeared. I said to myself, "Oh good, probably just my imagination," until blood spots start appearing on the road. I decided not to tell my stepdad because I thought it probably was just an animal which got hurt, or my imagination playing with my boredom. But It never ended, and what made it worse is that when I asked to stop for a second to take a piss, the man appeared again. Only difference was it was on the opposite direction. I said to myself, "Oh, fuck's sake, not you again." I decided to not pay any attention to it and just carry on with my business. When I finished, the man was running towards me and kept getting closer and closer. I got scared and jumped hastily back inside the truck and told him to start moving because the man was coming. He laughed and told me I was crazy and that there's nobody. The blood stoked a few kilometers away, and it never came to my mind after that until my mom told me about seeing the same man and the same blood trait on a similar road. It might not be as scary as some others in the post, but it really messes with your brain. I'm not sure why my brain decided this was a good thread to read as I lay in bed close to midnight. Do you want the one about hallucinating rabbits or the UFO? Have you heard the one about Large March? My uncle saw people asking him a ride, but that those people didn't have feet. Not my story, but there was this Reddit post that I can't find where the trucker swears he saw a Prius use a turn signal. I call bluffed fee. Not a truck driver, but still a traveling in the middle of nowhere story. Many years ago, we were driving back to Southern California from a cabin stay in Northern California. These was a huge car accident on the freeway that was adding for hours to our drive. This was when top mits were at their peak and started to come standard with traffic avoiding redirections. Anyways, the top mit chimes up as the sun's going down and says it can save us 3 hours if we get off the freeway. Then it proceeds to lead us through the moonless night on rural roads surrounded by cornfields. I turn to my wife and say I've seen this movie before. Keep your opinion. A few minutes later, there's a van on the side of the road with its hazard lights on, and normally I would stop and help, but no way, not tonight, Satan. And for the next hour of driving, having no idea what was around us or where we were, it was one thing after another. Broken down cars with hazards on, having semis on either side of us, making us hold our breath that they don't force us to stop. Too many of every horror film trope for a simple 1-hour detour. Not exactly relevant, but still creepy AF. My dad is a trucker, and about 20-some years ago, a woman committed suicide by running out in front of him. He said that every night around the time she died, the cab of his truck would drop a few degrees in temperature and he felt a presence. He said this went on for a few weeks, and finally he spoke out to her and said he forgave her and wished that she had peace. He said he never experienced the eeriness again. A friend of mine's husband is an auto driver. He told me a story last year in California. He decided to stop for the night in this diner parking lot. Wasn't much else around, but he thought a hot coffee would feel wonderful. So he hops off the truck, walks in. He's greeted by a beautiful lady named Jackie. She welcomes him, sits him down, and asks if he'd like some pancakes and coffee. He tells her he isn't hungry. She frowns and brings back some coffee and homemade pie, tells him he needs to eat it. It's the most delicious thing he's ever tasted. Jackie sits down with him and talks for an hour. He realizes she's a special lady. An Elvis song comes on, and he asks her to dance. After a couple of slow dances, she hands him a rose. He thanks her, and she asks him to come back in before he leaves for a hot breakfast. He nods and heads out to his sleeper, wakes up to pounding on the window. Sheriff is outside and asks him if he's doing all right. He says yes, sir. They get to talking a little, and he tells the sheriff that he's leaving soon after he goes in to say his goodbyes to Jackie. Explains a little about how he really liked her. The sheriff stares at him bewildered and says, "Jackie died 3 years ago." He motions to the diner that is run down and completely abandoned. Driver opens his truck and pulls out the rose he had left on the passenger seat. Sheriff takes a step back and tells him Jackie was known for putting fresh-cut roses on the tables. Apparently 3 men broke into the diner late one night and murdered Jackie during a robbery. Driver had no idea about any of this. Back in '99, I picked up a hooker in the middle of the desert. Right before I could climax, she vanished into thin air. making the long drive back to our university one midnight. My friend and I both saw a freakishly huge doe, or wolf-looking creature, on the side of the road, eyes glowing and everything. It had been quiet in my truck before this, but we both saw it at the same time and yelled out. We don't live in an area with wolves, so I've often thought about it. Our bet has always been some alpha dog or coyote that has grown huge in the woods, or a bear that we both just mistook for a canine. Very much looked like a canine though. Not a trucker myself, but I came from a family of it. The general one is the black dog hallucination. I'm a delivery driver for a florist. About 2 or 3 months ago, I had to deliver an arrangement about 2 hours' drive into the country from the city near the end of my shift. When I arrive at the address, I don't see any house but these old farming sheds and a really long dirt road. I get out of the truck, grab the arrangement, and walk down this dirt road. Sun is pretty much about to disappear, and I've walked about 10 minutes and am questioning whether or not I should have braved driving the truck down. I finally see this old shack with a light on, so I walk up to it. I'm about to go to the front door when I hear from around the side of the house, "Just leave it." I answer, "It does live here. Just leave it by the door. It will eventually get to them." I do so, and walk as quick as I could back to the truck, lock it, and drive away a bit quicker than normal. My dad was a long-haul trucker years back. He would drive from Ontario all over the US. The one creepy encounter I remember him mentioning was as he was passing through Florida, of course. He was driving through the Everglades late into the night, out in the middle of nowhere. No civilization for miles either way, when he notices a white figure come into the headlights, or on the shoulder of the road. He slows down, and there is a man completely naked coming out of the swamp. My father slows and stops in the road, thinking this guy ain't need help, as this man starts crossing over the road. He stops dead in front of the truck and stares at my dad, at which point my dad realizes this naked man is holding a shotgun. He stands there for a few seconds staring, holding this gun, and then continues across and disappears back into the wilderness whence he came. So many questions. Not a truck driver. However, I do have a somewhat creepy story. My friends and I were taking a road trip from Arizona to California. We decided we wanted to go before the sunrise, and we left about midnight. We were about 3 hours in, but my car needed gas and the girls, and I wanted to stop to toke up. We had a considerable amount of weed in the car, and we wanted to get rid of all of it before our drive back. So we start to roll a joint in this poorly lit gas station. We were just about to take a hit when this guy comes running up to my car and starts to pound on the driver's side window. I rolled it down just enough to talk to him, but not enough for him to force entry into my car. He seemed scared and shaken up, but something didn't seem right. He was sweaty, and I could tell he was looking inside my car for something. At first I thought he was an undercover cop, and my heart was racing. However, he said he had some cart rubble and asked if we would take a look at it. At this point, it was 3:00. I had all my doors locked and had not gotten gas yet. I knew nothing of cars, and neither did any of the ladies in the car. We told him this. I told him I could call a tow for him, although he persisted on using my phone. The other girls were freaking out, and of course I was too. I could see a payphone by the vending machine at the gas station, and told him I would slip him a few quarters through the crack in my window so he could call whoever he would like. Out of nowhere, his tone changed. He got really calm and looked me dead in the eye. He told me to unlock the door. My eyes darted towards the direction of his car, and we could see 2 other males pacing while one male was sitting in the driver's seat. I noped the fuck right out of there, told him to go fuck himself, rolled up the window, and hopped right back on the highway. I know for a fact, if we had gotten out of that car, we would have never been seen again. I called the police to report him and asked to be notified if there was an arrest made. I never heard back. Arizona's #1 for sex trafficking. Be safe out there, ladies. Well, I'm never truck driving now, Zed. Last week, I was in the middle of nowhere in northern Alabama, driving at night. Went over a small rise and see something on the side of the road between me and the next little. Though, as I get closer, realize it's kind larger, so I edge myself slightly away from it in my lane in case it's a tree or something. Turns out to be a homeless dude on the side of the road wearing some kind of tan trench coat and a really gaunt look in his eyes, like he wanted me to hit him. It was creepy. Not a truck driver, but I drive far for work sometimes. I once got a flat tire at home on a really remote back road up a mountain about an hour drive away from any houses or anything, without any reception or a jack to change the tire. Had to wait a half hour or so for a truck to go by, and I flagged them down with the light on my phone. Asked if he had a jack I could use to change my tire, and he said I got a jack, but you ain't getting it. And he drove away before I could even say anything. Sometime later someone stopped and helped. I genuinely thought I would die that day. Airline pilot here. That kind of counts in the air. Probably the creepiest thing I've heard was the distress call of a small general aviation aircraft going down. This was around 2014 in the WA. He had just blown a cylinder head and oil was shooting out all over his windshield. You could hear the panic in his voice as he radioed out that he couldn't see and was trying to report his position to a few airliners so that they could relay to AT. I checked the news that night, and he actually died in the crash. It was a pretty eerie feeling that we heard the last words of a pilot fighting for his life while we were just cruising along above the clouds at 35,000 feet, completely powerless to do anything other than reach out to him over the radio. Had a pretty wild encounter with some scarred, toothless meth weakers on a layover. Read at war as if anyone's interested in that. Give this lad an upvote for such a good question. I used to do music back in the 80s and 90s as part of the sound and setup crew. This entailed many late-night drives in the equipment truck through some very isolated sections of our state after the show to get home. One night me and my pal were driving through a dark, desolate, swampy area on a two-lane highway round 2 in the morning. Out of nowhere, we noticed a car that had driven off the road and into the woods. All that was visible were headlights shining on trees and red tail lights. Not really knowing what to do, we drove past, but then realized that the car in the woods could have been the result of an accident of some sort. So we were compelled to turn around to check it out in case someone needed help. This situation really creeped me out since I knew I could potentially witness some sort of gruesome accident, and I remember forcing myself out of the truck to reluctantly inspect the situation. Upon arriving where the car was, I walked into the woods to the scene. The car door was open and keel arm beeping. Ding, ding, the headlights still on, but no one to be seen anywhere. No blood, broken glass. My only guess is the car belonged to a drunk driver who drove off the road into the woods and left the scene. I still wonder what happened there that night, but can only assume it was just an abandoned car after the driver had too much fun. I posted this in another thread. Not a truck driver, but do a lot of driving for work, and I just like driving. Driving from Spokane, WA to Omaha, NE was cruising down Highway 212 in the middle of the night in southern Montana. About 12 I'm pulling through the only town named Deer, Mount Maybe. I've tried to find it on a map since, but can't be certain. On that lonely stretch of highway, one stoplight town, and I get stopped at the only red light. Hadn't seen a vehicle on the road since I had hopped off I-90 about an hour prior, and there wasn't a single person outside in the town. Sitting at that red light, a loud siren almost starts sounding, loud enough that I don't hear how any person in the town or within a few miles could have slept through it. It reminded me of the siren from the movie Silent Hill. I gunned it through the red light and away from that town as fast as my little four-cylinder Malibu would go. It may not seem that crazy, but just imagine the most haunting sound you've ever heard in a place you've never been, several hours separated from seeing a person last. I'm sure there's an innocent explanation for the siren, but it still sends chills down my spine just thinking of it. Driving home through what could be considered the outskirts of town, a young woman ran through the street waving at me and yelling something. She was wearing nothing but a t-shirt and panties. There's a lot of homeless people in that area and a lot of meth in my town, so I just kept going. It's fairly common for women to flag a car down and distract them while a bunch of guys scramble out of the bushes to fuck you up and take your car. But a mile down the road I realized she didn't really look homeless. I felt guilty for not stopping, and the ethical thing to do was risk the carjacking for the possibility the woman was in danger. Shitty people shouldn't turn everyone else into shitty people. With fur, the woman was gone. I only passed one car when I flipped around. A blue 99's Toyota. There are no stores or houses, just sand, dirt, rocks, brush. Later that night it occurred to me that she may have been running from the man in the blue Toyota. I hope she was a carjacker, not a truck driver. But a few years ago, I was driving back from Georgia to Arkansas. The trip usually means I cross into the northern part of Alabama, where I normally take a wee nap at this one rest area. I take my nap, go pee, and get a Red Bull from the vending machine. I get back in my car at 1:30 p.m. and start driving. The highway is completely deserted except for me. Found it weird, but shrugged it off. Next thing I know, it's nearing 6 a.m. and the sun's coming up. My gas tank was near empty at the rest stop. I had 3 for a tank. My odometer shows I've driven like 250 miles, but my Gips showed I was only about 10 miles from the rest area. I have no recollection of the time lost. Just poof, gone. I once smelled a fart that I hadn't dealt while driving alone. You ain't felt terror like that? I mean, I'm not a trucker, so I don't have any stories, but if you're looking for any, listen to the podcast Alice Isn't Dead. First episode is creepy as hell. Not a truck driver, but while I was driving through Nevada during the day, a jet flew directly over my car. Scared the shit out of me cause it was so loud. It was really creepy that while driving back through the desert in the dead of night, I saw a deer slowly walking across the road. Didn't even flinch as I was bearing down on him. On the other hand, I saw a lot of stars those nights cause it was so empty. I don't remember the town other than it was near Oklahoma-Kansas border, but we pulled into this town and the place was deserted. Most of the buildings and homes looked like they were less than 20 years old, including schools. It's still one of the creepiest things I had ever seen. Later learned the town was host to a lead mine that structurally undermined the town. The truck was under the posted weight limit, and the water supply was contaminated, which is the reason it was deserted, but still creepy. I'm also not a truck driver, but I do drive 5 hours one way to work. My shift gets out at 11:30, so if I've got a second wind, I can usually make it the whole way home. Sometimes I have to stop to nap, so I recall getting tired shortly before Binghamton, which from work to Binghamton proper is about 1.5 hours. This exit with a gas station I stop at frequently is about 15 minutes before this. Anyway, I stop, gas up, buy my snacks and smokes, and put up a sign in my window saying I'm okay. I just have 4 more hours of driving to do. Please don't knock. I've had that happen countless times, and if I'm really out, people think I'm dead and call the cops. Then I have to convince the cops that I just worked 32 hours with about 4 hours of sleep, not nodding out on heroin or whatever. God bless the people for thinking they're helping, and I don't want them to stop. Hence the note lol, and I push the seat back to nap. I have an alarm set for 20 minutes. This is about this thing, I know. It's 630, and I'm on some back road with houses, but also fields, and I'm driving super slowly. I have no idea where I am and how I came to be here. I don't have a lot of service bars, but I plug in my mom's address and hope directions pop up. It does, and it takes me to a highway entrance in Harper-Sonai. Okay, in about 20 minutes, I'm back on. I don't recall how long before this story happened, but I had gotten into an accident falling asleep at the wheel. Totaled my car. Got a nice eyebrows car and nosebleed. Back more fucked up than it had been, but otherwise okay. Got fucked by my insurance too. But then this happens, and it scared the fuck out of me. Assuming I woke up to my alarm, it would have been like 130 and I came to about 630. What the hell was I doing for 5 hours? How did I not hit anything? Checked out the car. It was fine. How was I driving the speed limit because I imagine any faster or slower would have gotten the cops on me? Just a how. Or was I asleep the whole time but still slept? Drove about 25 minutes until I really woke up. The terror allowed me to complete the drive.